The following presentation will provide a brief comparison between France and the United States. We will be using the pestle framework to analyze the two countries. The country of France has a population of around 64.6 million citizens, ranging over a total area of 640,679 square kilometers. The capital city is Paris. The two major languages spoken in the country are French and English, and the two most common currencies used are the franc and the euro. According to the World Factbook, France operates under a semi-presidential republic, with Emmanuel Macron currently in the position of president or chief of state, and Edouard Philippe in the position of prime minister or head of government. France remains a free country according to the Freedom House organization, with an aggregate score of 90 out of 100 and an overall freedom rating of 1.5 out of 7. According to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, France was ranked 23rd in the world in 2016, following closely behind the United States, who was ranked 18th. Over the past decade, France's score has shifted only slightly within the range of 68 to 72 out of 100. On a global scale, France remains in the top 15% of countries with regard to Rule of Law Index, but has shown a steady decrease over the last decade when it comes to political stability and absence of terrorism and violence, with a sharp drop in 2016, according to the Worldwide Governance Indicators. In addition, France has remained in the top 20% globally with regard to voice and accountability. The data collected from the World Bank shows that overall, and in comparison to the United States, France has remained a country where citizens are able to actively participate in government elections, uphold a fair justice system, and avoid politically motivated terrorism and violence. Moving on to economic indicators, France has shown major improvements with regard to human development, including a gradual increase in life expectancy, a decrease in the annual homicide rate, and an increase in the number of years of school on average that each citizen is expected to attend. There does not appear to be a consistent trend with France's FDI outflows and inflows, which implies that the country's domestic producers and consumers' dependency on foreign providers and the domestic firms' dependency on foreign demand remains ever-changing. According to the World Bank, France is showing a gradual increase in both GNI and GDP as an annual percentage, following a significant lapse in 2012. Overall, France remains an active competitor in global trade.
To begin the social-cultural section, we have Trompenaars data and Hofstede's dimensions. Trompenaars data is a framework for cross-cultural communication applied to general business and management. This model of national cultural differences is broken up by dimensions. The first dimension is universalism versus particularism. This measures rules versus relationships. Next, we have individualism versus culturalism, which measures whether someone is more for the betterment of themselves or for the community. Next, we have neutral versus emotional. This measures whether or not someone holds their emotions in or expresses them. Next, we have specific versus diffuse. This measures space in which they allow people to enter, public versus private, and how close they let people get to them. Next, we have achievement versus ascription. This measures status based on actions or based on who you are. Then lastly, we have internal versus external control, which asks the question, do we control our environment or are we controlled by it? When looking at Trompenaars data, we see that France scores lower than the United States in each category. However, moving over to Hofstede's dimensions, the data is split between the two countries. When looking at Hofstede's indulgence, we see that France scores lower than the United States. However, our primary data from Stacy Smith contradicts this statement. Stacy Smith is a friend of mine who studied abroad in her undergraduate in France. According to Stacy's statement, the French value time off work more than we do, and they have more holidays that they honor by spending time with family. They have a 2-week spring break versus 1 week, more weekends and holidays where school was closed, and they make sure to take lunch away from their desk. This feels contradictory to what the data states. The U.S. does not seem to place as much value on time off as was described about France by Stacy. Next, we will take a look at religion. The United States chart affirms the statement about our country being a melting pot. We represent 11 different religions in our country. Looking at France, you can see that over 60% of their population is Roman Catholic, and only 6 different groups are represented. So we'll take a look at our PISA scores. PISA is a test that measures science, reading, and math proficiencies for tests taken by 15-year-old students across the world. This is based on the interpretation of content that they have been taught. As you can see, the education in both of our countries seems to be on par with one another. Also, you can notice that the boys' and the girls' scores are not differing too much. What's interesting, though, is how high the scores are in both of our countries compared to the rest of the world. We'll look at the technological indicators, specifically research and development. The French spend almost as much on research and development as the United States does. However, when we look at the patents and technological journal articles, the United States is outputting a lot more patents and journal articles than France. I believe this can be explained by when you look at individualism back on Hofstede's and Trumpenar's data. The French are more collective and the United States is more individual, which means the French do more to support the whole rather than to promote their own achievement. I believe this is why we see more patents and journal articles coming out of the United States, because people are pushing their own information.
As we look at the environmental indicators for France, we use the Environmental Performance Index, or EPI, and we compare it to that of the United States. France ranks 27th in the world out of 178 countries that are part of this index. The United States ranks 33rd. France has a score of 71.05 to the US's 67.52. Now, they both have been trending up over the past 10 years. France has increased about 3 1/3%, and the US has gone up about 2 1/4% in their rankings and score. The main areas where France is higher ranking and beats out the United States are due to the health impacts from the environment and the water and sanitation, where in those two categories are ranked number 1. France's legal system is a civil law system versus that of the US being common law. Basically, this means that all their laws are written in code and are strictly adhered to when cases go before a judge and those decisions are made. Whereas in the United States, judges will use past cases and the precedences set by those cases to determine their judgment on a present case, and how that law that was written 100 years ago, for example, may or may not really apply in the same fashion today. As we move on to legal indicators, we see that France ranks below the US when it comes to intellectual property rights, meaning they just don't put a high priority on intellectual property, and that also is why we see a lower number of patent protection for France than the United States, and that's steady over the past 10 years, although 9 and 10 years ago the gap was much bigger, so France has closed the gap somewhat, but it's still a steady and noticeable difference than the US. As we take a quick look at the SWOT for France, we see in their strengths that they are ranked 21st in the world for Human Development Index, which points to a promising positive development of their country. Their PISA scores are fairly high for both boys and girls, showing they have a good secondary education system. One of their weaknesses is the lack of patents coming out of France, as mentioned earlier, due to intellectual property rights being a low priority. An opportunity for them would be to focus more on innovation and creating patents, since they have the momentum from their research and development. And a high uncertainty avoidance has potential to boost the development of complex technologies. Threats to France: they are investing significantly in research and development, but there is no correlation between that and the volume of journal articles published. They also seem to have a deterioration of political stability in 2016, which could breed other economic issues. And finally, languages on the World Factbook listed as 100% French. Lack of diversity in language could create barriers to market entry.